Studying the art of letters under Mom Edith was a rite of passage for all Filipino writers, says a fellow of Silliman University National Writers Workshop to the mother of Philippine literature. Edith Tiempo was born during the American occupation in 1919 and lived in different cities growing up. Her father, Salvador Lopez, a government auditor, brought his family with him on different postings. He passed away when Edith was young, and her mother, Teresa Cutaran, returned to Nueva Vizcaya, where Edith finished high school under Felix Amaging Bronner, the teacher that set this young woman up to become winner of Carlos Palanca Memorial Awards, Cultural Center of the Philippines Award for Novel, Gawad Pambansang Alagad ni Balagtas, and a Philippine National Artist for Literature. This woman of northern Luzon sewed together the most beautiful of words ever written for poetry by a Filipina, a seed planted by her great teacher, Felix Omaging Bronner, who introduced her to French novelist Honoré de Balzac, socialist realist political writer Maxime Gorky, and Nobel Prize winner, poet, and novelist Anatole France. Felix Amaging Bronner, along with Edith's sister Arlene Lopez, the first writer in their family, set off young Edith to a quest of adventure fueled by the voices of the stories they sent her way, until she penned her own. Her constantly transient life must have fueled her imagination and painted color derived from the different places she experienced in sight, sound, scents, and flavor. Her fluidity and fluvial life was transformed into the written word. Her Hispanic Filipino blood caught the eye of an American documentarian, and he hired her to become part of his film. She was in the first scene of his movie that led her to become an actress with the screen name Jezebel Lopez, Egyptian princess. She went on to star in pre-war films like Prinsesa Kamuning and Hatol ng Mataas na Langit. Love in the time of World War II was never really mentioned when you talk about the marriage of the literary monarchs of Philippine history, but it was during these troubled times when Dr. Edilberto K. Tiempo entered Mom Edith's life in form of a short story, and she in his through a letter. She captivated the Rockefeller and Guggenheim Fellow through her distinct use of words, prompting him to travel from the southern islands to the northern mountains to seek out what in his heart he already knew he wanted in his life: his future wife. Doc Ed and Mom Edith, the pillars of Silliman University, had finally met, and with them the beginning of the most important part of every Filipino writer's history. They were academians. They pursued the highest level of education in spite of the death of a parent, a war-torn country, a long-distance relationship, and limited opportunities. They dusted off each tether and marched on to achieve what we can only dream of. Doc Ed was granted a fellowship at the University of Iowa Writers' Workshop only a year after the war, while Mom Edith graduated magna cum laude in Silliman University. Edith joined her husband in University of Iowa to study under Paul Engel, not to be sidelined as just a fiction writer, but also a poet. She believes that poetry is the best expression because it is more than what anybody would expect. It is open to interpretation. She said a poem should have craft, artfulness, and substance all together for a poem to be proper. Edith has been quoted to say, "Do not state the meaning of a poem, but allow the poem to reveal itself to the reader by using imagery, understatement suggestion, tone control ellipsis, double negatives, repetition, etc." But above all, it is your job as a writer to give the poem a life force, a spirit. She was passionate in saying, there can be no poetry without spirit. In fact, it strives on it. Otherwise, they are only words without meaning. To make you a believer, that it seems is of utmost importance of all. So Edith with her husband gave the Philippine literary world a perpetual institution, the Silliman University National Writers Workshop. A fellow of Silliman University National Writers Workshop, Albert B. Casuga, wrote on his book, Aesthetics of Literature, that Edith uses figures of thought, speech, and language. He continues on to read one of her poems from her first published book, The Tracks of Babylon. What distance gives. When you reach for me in that obscure world, where like ashes of the air, your eyes and hands and voice batters, with a stark and ghostly urgency, the transparent doors of my closed lids, I struggle to confine the precarious grace, the force, the impulse of this fantasy. Yes, I grieve, but in its sure, wise way, it is that grief that bids the ghost to go. This is the reality we stand to lose, that the push of muscle strength is also the dear enfolding brute embrace of reason shocking our length. The loss is gain for the will to choose, the distance given, right to know. Crip Yusan calls Mommy Edith's poem cerebral and rendered emotionally. It extends to her first fiction, A Blade of Fern. The story steeps in sentiments akin to anyone's struggle in accepting their fates. There are only a few who can identify with Bernardo's volatile existence that has been almost wiped out in our generation, either to technology, huge corporate takeover, or simply edged out of their right to work the region. But she made us feel everything they felt. Bernardo's pained existence, the metals, the horror, were conveyed for us to remember. Her second fiction proves to be more relatable. His Native Coast speaks of an earlier, yet still relevant Western-influenced existentialist struggle that most Filipinos understand, more so now with our OFW, mass migrations, and almost forgotten heritage. For her Carlos Palanca winning short story, The Black Monkey, we could hear the mountain sounds almost as if we were there with Marina. We could feel the desperation of a fish out of water that torments a fear-stricken mind. Edith Tiempo was the first woman to win the Philippine National Artist Award. She wrote stories and poems filled with such profound human sensibilities that they allowed us an insight without the scars of a miner, a breakdown of a lost soul, or a fired gun from an uncontrolled fear. I will end with the words from the new director of Silliman University National Writers Workshop, Susan Lara, who wrote about Edith's work as a writer so beautifully. In her fiction, Edith is just as exacting. Her character is complex and memorable, a confluence of conflicting impulses and principles. She always starts with a character, even in The Builder, which she calls her most plot-driven novel. The character she created, Lawanagan Gimod, is a person, but capable of murdering. A tribal man who was sent to the States and trained there to be a Christian preacher, but could not entirely throw away his tribal instincts. His nemesis, a physics professor turned reluctant detective, is brilliant and quickly responsive in some way as to make him vulnerable as a victim. If Edith's characters jump off the page when we read her fiction, it is because they come to life before her as she creates them. She says, I shape the character and then he is on his own, not me anymore. The character acts on his own without my interference. It's hard to explain because I don't know the point exactly when I believe he's acting on his own and not me shaping him.